some output, certain input. The canonical example in technical lessons is image recognition. So you have images of cats and of dogs. That's the input. And as output, you want to have, is it a cat or a dog? Sorry for the dog people, cat or something. And what is learned is a probabilistic mapping between the input and the output. How is it done? Well, we somehow extract a couple of features. Let's imagine we could display cats and dog images by two features, length of their whiskers and points of their muzzle, just for the sake of an example. And then we as engineers define some function templates, something that can create a mapping, for example, this simple straight line. And then what we do is we manipulate the parameters of the function, how it is located in space, such that it fits all the examples we use during training. And once we have that, the probability is constituted, for example, by the distance of any example from the line. The closer it is, the smaller the closer the likelihood is to 50% to sure. The farther it is away, the higher the probability is that this is actually the dog. And this not only works for simple examples like that, with a simple straight line function, it also works for weakly function that we call neural networks, and for more intricate relationships, for example, the relationship of the next word given a context of words. This is a large language model. This is the engine behind Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, and so on. This is a large language model. Still exactly the same thing. A probabilistic mapping from input to output, just that here the input is not an image, it's words. Something like this sentence, what runs through Zurich? What would you say would be the outcome of this function? I cannot hear it, it's probably my age. I was recently asking that question in Stuttgart, and somebody shouted from the middle of the audience, the money! I thought he was wrong. And of course he was wrong because it's only outputting the next word. So the would have been the correct answer. And then this the is added to the input in the next iteration, and then maybe money comes out, or maybe limit, or seal, or whatever else. Big traffic jam of cars along the main station, whatever else. But this is how a large language model works. Same probabilistic mapping than in all of the machine. What is the output? And of course, you know that you're all used to these tools, and we have been talking and discussing them all day, and I guess the last 2 days as well. Here's an example that might be a little bit surprising. Let's see. I asked one of these tools, one of these reasoning models, when they came out, the following question. The surgeon, who's the boy's father, says, I can't operate on this boy, he's my son. Who is the surgeon to the boy? Simple question, straightforward answer. It's in the text. It just needs to repeat that piece of text. The model thinks for 10 seconds, which means it's prompting itself, giving more context, rephrases its answer, and finally concludes the surgeon is the boy's father. This is basically exactly the model Mr. Altman said. This has PhD level intelligence, and you can charge 20K per month for it. It will be worth much more. This comes out, of course, not only something like this, but also something like this is not only a reality, it's also to be expected that something like this comes out. Why is that the case? Let's dig one slide, just one slide from this, deeper into how it works. Machine learning is actually function approximation, or what we sometimes call it curve fitting. What does it mean? Let's imagine we have the true mapping between input and output, just for the sake of showing a simple curve. Let's have the parallel here, for which we know the closed form, math, and whatever. A simple curve that we have all seen. That's all. This is the true mapping that we don't know. The only thing we know is a couple of data points sampled with some noise from that rate. Imagine input and output from text or images, something like that. And you see they're not exactly aligned on the curve. There might be some noise, maybe they're measuring stuff. It wasn't all very accurate. But in principle, the points give us examples of how the underlying mapping really works. Now, what machine learning does is it learns to interpolate between these points by means of mathematical optimization, and that works differently according to how the data distribution is located. Let's examine a couple of examples. For example, here we see that the green curve, which we have learned, almost perfectly overlaps the blue underlying curve that we don't know. Why? Because these two examples perfectly sample our real underlying relationship, and our means of interpolating, just making a linear stretch between them, somehow suits the underlying function. If the underlying function will be more wiggly, it wouldn't work like that. But here it works very well, so here machine learning works very well. Let's look at this point here. Here we had 3 data points, very good, but they were a little bit off because of noise and so on of the real underlying function. So here the green curve doesn't really perfectly overlap with the curve we want to learn, but practically speaking, that probably is not a problem. That still works well. So machine learning can, by means of learning from examples, uncover the true hidden underlying relationship. And the problem, of course, you already spotted is here. And what is the problem? That here the curve is somehow a little bit more difficult than just a straight connection, and we didn't have data to show that. And the model cannot learn it when it has no data to learn it. So this is exactly the reason why we get hallucinations from LLMs. Hallucinations in LLMs is if such a model comes up with text for which it didn't have examples to learn from that were close enough. And so it makes something up that linguistically, statistically makes sense and has no grounding in reality. And also the example from the last slide that was factually completely wrong makes a lot of sense and can be explained here because this falls into this regime here. The sentence was, of course, handpicked because it is a sentence that in a similar form exists 10,000s of times in the internet as checked for human gender biases. And in the version on the web, the sub-sentence, who is the boy's father, is not part of the sentence on the web. So the system has read a similar sentence, but not exactly the same, 10,000 of times during its training and learned the statistical correlation between such a question and the answer of something female. And now, when we ask not the same but a similar question, it cannot digress from its learned statistics and answer the true obvious answer. It will answer the statistically plausible answer. What do we conclude from it? Well, that machine learning in the end is on average maybe even better than our combined judgment here in the room and online. Maybe better on average, probably better on average, otherwise the systems wouldn't be a good business case. But in any individual case, they can be wrong. Why? They have no clue about reality and about facts and about all these kind of things. They only have a statistical comprehension of, in that case, even not of physical reality, but of language. And that leads to them being, on average, very good, in every individual case, potentially wrong. So what are the implications of that if we dig a little deeper, if we unpack that statement? Well, the results are, for example, not neutral. Machine learning is in the best sense a data-driven method. There is no normative things flowing into the model training at the beginning. It's just learning statistics from data. These systems, for example, the LLMs have been trained on Reddit, 4chan, and all other kinds of bad and very ugly stuff from the internet. So you cannot expect perfect grammar, and you cannot expect perfect ethics from what it has learned from these texts, and also perfect fact recounting. They pick everything up from the data, including the biases of the human original writers of the training. The results are statistically plausible. This is a training paradigm, but that doesn't mean that they need to be factual. Actually, it is part of the method that is always a non-zero likelihood for failure. Being error-free is not part of the methodology. Then, next to it, if the model is currently outputting something where it's completely certain about, or where it has absolutely no clue and it's hallucinating, is not known to the model. And it's very hard technically to go around it. It is possible, but it is costly in terms of execution time, so typically vendors don't do that. So a model will typically output everything it does very, very confidently, even if it's utterly unsure about the answer. But that's the problem. If it's speaking to us in our language and it comes very confidently across, and we don't have very high awareness and AI literacy training, we typically too easily give in to we take that as well. Final point here. AI will make errors, that we are fallible and make errors is known to everybody who lived more than 10 seconds. So both commit errors, and the errors are very different. Because of the way they are produced, our intelligence works very, very differently from the statistical pattern matching. So it's complementary if you wish. But the other side of the coin is our errors are complementary. And that means when we ask a question that we think is very difficult, we might scrutinize the answer we get because we think, I need to check that whole difficult question. It's maybe super easy for the system. But then we do something else where we think that's super easy for a 3-year-old human, and AI systems, maybe not speaking of language models, but something that drives your car, may completely fail because it's very hard for the AI system. The errors are complementary. What is very easy for us, the system might think is a stupid error, and the other way around. This is psychologically, again, very hard to scrutinize exactly the stuff I think that should be obvious. Well, not to that system. It has, if you wish, a different perspective on reality, statistical perspective. And that is not so easily comprehensible for us who have been trained for however many decades we already live to look at the world differently. So in the end, you could say, especially there where these systems simulate persons because they speak to us in terms of typing chatbots and so on, these personas are, well, unreal. They're not like real persons, they have different characteristics. And now allow me a little play on words and take an image from popular fiction. There's another kind of unreal person in popular fiction that's an undead person, a zombie. Think of a zombie when you type with the chatbot, just to remind yourself that this is not like you, but very, very different. It can still be super helpful. I founded a company that's producing stuff like that. I think it's very, very helpful. But it's not very helpful to think of it in terms like us. But I'm probably preaching to the choir. So maybe I bring another picture. How can they be compared to the human then? Well, I opened with this definition of AI as being the simulation of intelligent behavior, right? Now, follow me through that picture. It's not perfect like all pictures, but maybe it's helpful. AI relates to us humans, to the human, as a DJ relates to musician. Why? Because a DJ simulates musical sound by completely different means. So if you want to make dance music, there's almost no difference between what a DJ does and what a good band does. If you go to different kinds of music, I don't know, church music with an organ or so, the DJ somehow is not of much use because it's a different genre, it's a different way of performing, different values are involved. And the DJ is not a replacement or not even a match for the musicians from church music. So why is that the case? Because DJing has never been developed and designed and conceived as a general method of producing music. It has been conceived with a very, very specific goal in mind, namely producing dance music. And it's very good at that. If you ever entered the disco and you saw the dance floor explode, well, it works, right? You don't want a band there, you don't need a band there. Many other ways you want a musician, it's not a replacement. And in the same way, AI systems, especially machine learning systems, are not in any way on eye level with a human because they're not general in any way. They have not been designed like that. It's just since a few years, since a couple of tech CEOs started to market their stuff in terms of equality to humans. It's not even a methodology. It's a very, very specific, not general, very specific methodology of taking pre-recorded behavior samples from humans and rearranging them in a clever way. And that works very well where you have a lot of these behavior samples on the internet in text form. It doesn't work at all, for example, for smell. There's no sensor for the computer, there's no data set, you cannot have an AI system that smells anything. And for a lot of different other things as well. And because it's interpolation, it also can extrapolate a lot. Just good. And I think now we're already squarely in the second topic, namely the narratives. But it was important to me to give you like to just set the floor with what is the basic nature of the kind of systems currently built. But when we look into public discourse, and all of this almost plays no role. What plays a role is the question: how will the future be? Will I have a job? Will it kill me or my kids or the grandkids latest? Like, how is the future going to be with these systems? And that depends on the technology you should think. So my extrapolation would be, I don't see any superintelligence emerging. I don't see a lot of progress, like fundamentally in AI in the last 7 years. I see a lot of product progress, but actually it was quite boring research in the last years, because fundamentally, like a lot of engineering breakthrough, but ideas, not so many. There is no AGI thing coming up. Systems are getting better while fundamentally keeping the same flaws they had since 70 years. It's not since, I don't know, ChatGPT came out 3 years, 4 years ago, not since then. We are using the same machine learning methodologies since the 1950s. Since then, the same fundamental problems. Like it's unreliable. It still can be super helpful, but fundamentally unreliable, fundamentally statistical, and so on. So no superintelligence, no AGI, my prediction. Instead, what will we get? Anybody in the room who still knows these kind of movies? Like the only old guy I'm probably the old. Good. What we will probably have is helpful personal assistants. We recently did a study on LLM-based assistants that can control your computer for you, do everything that you could do on a computer, write emails, file on a workshop, and so on. And this survey was published this year, beginning of this year, in one of the most prestigious AI journals. It basically shows that we are nowhere with respect to this when you speak about something that can be applied. I think these kind of helpful assistants will emerge within, let's be conservative, the next 5 years. If it would be in 3 years, I would be too surprised. If it takes 3 years longer, that's within the uncertainty range, I would guess. But that's not AGI. This is clever engineering around the methods we know. A new paradigm, but we are now working with since 70 years with the one we have. But this is not the story you see in the media. This is not the story you see when you watch The Matrix. This is not the story you read when you read Yuval Noah Harari's very interesting books. Or the story you get when you're reading the open letter from the Future of Life Institute that we should stop AI experiments because it's super dangerous. By the way, who thinks that this is a thing that's 3 years old? You probably all read the news last week. Mr. Trump banned certain models from the company Anthropic because guess what? It's so dangerous. It was already the marketing term for GPT-2 7, 8 years ago. So the story remains the same, but it leads to this picture. We, in the role of Morpheus, Agent Smith, AI, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, virus of the planet. Go out of the door, make room for machine beings. That's the main narrative, more or less. We are a German concept. We are the old model, and the new model is digital. Somehow, this is the undercurrent of almost every article I've ever read or seen in public news and social media in the last, I don't know, many years, but it has accelerated in the last couple of years. Now, what is behind that? What's behind all these things I listed for Harari's books and so on? It is narratives based on the worldview. What kind of worldview? I looked a little bit into that, even if it's not my main research topic, just because, well, I'm leading an AI research institute. I have almost 50 employees who build these systems. I should better be sure that we are not working towards the abolition of humans. Or I should step down. So I looked into this. What I found was this, and the article here has more news on it, and you probably know it already. Caution, the article is a scholarly article, but the two authors are not just researchers, they are also activists, so take it with a grain of salt. It's still, in my evaluation, pretty accurate when you read over little bit of disgust that they sprinkle throughout their sentences. They give these worldviews that are driving the narratives an acronym, because there wasn't one before, they call it TEST, an English term, an acronym, standing for transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. A lot of isms. And the story roughly goes like that with respect to AI. And I'm now very much summarizing, but it's not much better in reality. So the rationalism, basically, from that they get that we are not very similar as beings to this, because basically everything can be reduced to computation. So there is no spirit, there is no soul, there is no consciousness, except of the meta phenomenon of computation. So basically, we and the machines are one in the worst possible sense. And then they reverse the argument and say, but if we have something like consciousness, and if we have something like general intelligence, and if we can create and improve and so on, then the same is true for machines. Ha! That's perfect. I don't have to show a scientific paper to say why my AI model is great. I can just, by means of philosophy, state it. And this is exactly what all of them do. It's a company goal of OpenAI, for example, to create AGI. Not because they have any theory that says this is possible, but they have a philosophy that says it's possible. So this is the singularitarianism. If we are conscious, machines can be as well. If we are general intelligence, machines can so as well. And it's then there's a little bit of reductionism, and they say, well, intelligence is something measured on a linear scale. We are currently here. You could probably read half a book, and then we will be here. And another half book, and we will be here. And if you do that for the next 100 years, we will be over there. And that means we will be more intelligent. Now, if you do that indefinitely, at some point, for sure, eventually we will reach a point where we can improve ourselves. And from there, singularity. Again, philosophical, not technical. There is no technical argument for it. And there's a lot of, but I guess you have better arguments for it than me, a lot of philosophical arguments against that intelligence is a one-dimensional state. Anyway, finally, there comes to transhumanism. So when machines will be generally intelligent and conscious and everything, they're still better than us, right? Because we have this intelligence, these features in a rotting body that has bodily, well, features and desires, needs to sleep, needs to eat, needs to whatever disgusting things like sex and whatever it ages and at some point it dies and decomposes. It's all very bad. And probably we humans should just become more like machines. Humans, not really nice. And the intelligence anyway can be percentages. That's the thing about it. And if you read that, the summary is there's astonishingly little regard for human worth and dignity. So if you're confronted with these stories in media where they're not put bluntly like that, but somehow embedded into narratives, it's by design that you feel somehow a little bit belittled and bereft of hope and so on. Now, this is on a planetary scale, just a minority of people who think this is a real deal, but the majority of these people build this technology in Silicon Valley. And if you want a measure of how far spread that is, Mr. Musk, who's again what is he now, the first trillionaire or something like that, so an influential figure, had it like in a tweet a couple of years ago. That pretty much sums up my worldview. Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the largest investors in AI, PC company in the US, had it in his Twitter headline, I will test realist. And you can go on and on. Harari, the Future of Life Institute, that had this open letter that was publicly discussed in every primetime news 10 years ago around the planet. It is a test real think tank, which is completely funded by these sources. So this is where our narratives are coming from. Period. They're coming from nowhere else. The public narratives come from there. Now that we have the narratives, let's look if there are connections. And I would say by now that there are connections should almost be evident. Because when we're talking about AI, we are not talking about the technology, we are talking about the narratives. Like when we're talking about the future of AI, we are not debating the goodness of fit of some functional approximation. we're talking about AGI, machine consciousness, and job apocalypse, and whatever, these kind of things that hinge on your worldview and not on the current realistic technological capabilities or that have growth. So I strike out digital here, not because I don't think there are connections, but because I want to make it clear. In my small mind, digital theology is a subpart of theology, and I thought probably there are connections to all of theology, not just to the digital part, but also to the digital part. So that's the idea behind the digital here. So I want to devote the remaining minutes to three hypotheses that we can discuss, and you can either disagree with, or let's think that it will be fun. The first is, to me, this is super obvious as a layperson in that sphere, that the AI narratives are not technological givens, but belief systems. My conclusion is, well, then you can engage them as such. And theologians are very used to engaging belief systems, scrutinizing them, looking at them from different angles, saying something. You know, probably like other disciplines as well, techies are very good at what they do. They have studied what they do, they're experts at what they do. And once you're very good at what you do, you start extrapolating. And you think everything that interests you, you're probably also good at. And you completely forget that there are things here where you're certain depth in your thinking, because you've studied it, you've worked in it for decades and so on. Then there are other things where you're actually just a layperson. And currently, we have this strange phenomenon that people who are fantastic in math and coding have read a popular book on philosophy by Mr. McGaskill, I think, and now think they are experts in philosophy, theology, and all these other humanities things, and think they are authorities in that. And maybe that needs a reality check. And that is the first connection I would draw here. Engage that stuff, not on the level of loss functions and technological stuff, because there are no questions actually here that matter to society. The questions that matter are currently questions of belief systems. We recently did that with a couple of colleagues here from the University of Zurich and back then the University of Cambridge, in an article that basically, and I was only invited because there was a larger chapter on training technology, so I played the same role as here at all. And afterward, for 20 pages, it just raises questions. Questions that are there because AI people raise them and then have their easy, simple answers that are not thought through and not looked at from different perspectives. And this paper basically puts a couple of antitheses against them and says, well, it would be great if some bright PhD student or research group might pick up one of these many questions we raised and does some work on it because it needs to be done. Otherwise, this stuff goes uncontested, and people might think, for example, journalists, that, well, this is the state of the art. AI will be conscious or is or whatever, which is, I don't know. Can you? You're online, right? I can say it's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. There are others who are of the same opinion, not just me. The Financial Times recently headlined, "We need to examine the beliefs of today's tech luminaries." By that they meant looking to the test wheel stories. There were a couple of articles by Mitfutter here in the NZZ in the last 2 years, and they were all not very positive about these underlying belief systems. Less, they still push their narratives, which doesn't fit my mind. But, well. And also, we are not going to details here now, but this talk by Marius is, for me, a very interesting and thought-provoking example of how a theologian can put some theology thoughts behind technological questions. If you have 15 minutes, so I found it very in the best possible way. Good. Second hypothesis. AI narratives obviously hinge at a certain anthropology and also at certain ideas of transcendence, whatever that is. At the very least, it's a conception of meaning. And this needs to be connected to the rich thought over the centuries that has been done in your disciplines and not in mine. We including now all the developers in Silicon Valley, just think we know it all just because we went through this. Maybe that needs a reality check. And this probably needs to be then fed back into how we design such systems. I'm very glad that while I widely disagree with all the philosophies behind Silicon Valley tech stories, I still think that products are really, really useful, and not much of this philosophy crept into my daily use of the product, so I can still use them quite well. But there are a couple of things that need attention. Let me go into a small tangent. We started a year ago or so working on something that we finally called pro-human AI design. And the thought was the following. Well, and it came from basically from social media research a couple of years after the fact that everybody's used social media and improved their minds. Well, they said very simple: technology changes our behavior. If behavior becomes something we do habitually, it changes something very much at the core of what we do. There was a very interesting article in the New York Times end of last November that analyzed almost 50 cases of prolonged chatbot use with ChatGPT actually, and those 50 users suffered psychosis. 9 of them, I think, it was 9, had to be hospitalized. 3 of them died from suicide. Reason: ChatGPT use, and not just ChatGPT use, but a specific design change made by the OpenAI team that made the system more sticky and more engaging, more psychopathic. It was the time when all of us used ChatGPT in 2025 early. I laughed at it because it was so like, oh, you're so great. That's the best question I ever had. Like for us, it was funny. 50 people had psychosis, 3 died. And that's a design issue. So very simply, what we did in our project was, as clumsily because we are technology people, trying to sketch out from actually theological anthropology what are certain core characteristics of what makes up a human, where are they touched by a certain professional use of these systems, and how does the system change in order that these characteristics are not diminished. Has been published recently, at least the first try, and I think a lot can be done. The company I co-founded now explores it in the connection with AI systems and doctors that write their medical reports with them. Final thesis. The AI narratives are very strong in the public opinion, but they are, and they always talk about the future, but they're extremely void of hope. And that's actually a problem for everything who isn't that belief system, because they'd actually love to have something better to say, but they can't. All the futures they come up with, based on their worldview, is very, very hopeless. I recently did a test for myself if I can come up with something better based on different assumptions, AGI, for example. And I broke that down in a blog post. I called it AI 2035. I don't give you the summary now, you can read it if you want. But the important thing is the future with our society future with AI is much less predetermined than some people think. They think AGI will occur every minute, and from then on, it's a finished script that will unfold. AGI is not coming within the next 10 years, so there's no script unfolding, and we have much more agency in our use, but also politically, in our procurement, and so on, as we think. We should use that. We should shape the future. Let's skip over that and come to conclusions. I want to make 3 points in a remark really quick. Some of the things I touched upon are available in a preprint, which you can get and scan that through. So I don't think that there will be lots of breakthroughs on the technological side in the next 2 years. Products will get better, but fundamental advantages and also problems will stay the same. It will just get a little better. No AGI that I expect. The important questions on society level, as I've said, are not the technological questions. And that means none of us is disqualified to comment on them. the question is, how do we want to live? And that's a question that everybody's, because we all want to live. And for me, that's a great thing. After 50 years of pretending that we can only debate whatever can be proven by the laws of physics, worldview is back on center stage, because worldview is determining everything in the current AI debate. So huge space for people arguing deliberately from a worldview, for example, from theology, for example, from Christian. I want to finish with a remark that's not so much geared at theologians but at believers. This workshop, this conference is about theology, and the provocative workshop is about AI and the church. The church is, for example, the assembly of believers. So let me allow the remark to believers. I said that the AI narratives currently are lacking a lot of hope. There's no hope in any future they paint. That reminds me very much of the beginning of the 6th chapter of the book of Hosea, where the prophet makes a diagnosis that deep darkness covers the earth and the weakness. And it's against that backdrop brings an exhortation. Let your light shine, arise and shine, for the Lord is in. And I think the initial question was, where do these two spheres encounter each other? And I think it's less the theological and technical sphere that encounter each other. Individuals, believers of different belief systems that encounter each other. And I think we should let light shine and let the light do what light does in darkness.